what's up everybody? It's your boy Tristan Barrocks here, the digital storyteller, and I'm super excited to be with you once again for another episode of Syndicate, where we will be talking about why your footage is way too sharp and how to solve that problem with one of these here and maybe one of these. Yo, but honestly, why is your footage so crunchy and so sharp though? Like, take off the sharpness. Are you ready? I'm ready. Let's go. Woo! Now, I'm really excited about today's topic because I think it's something that plagues a lot of young digital storytellers, filmmakers, creatives, and that is how to get that sort of cinematic look that doesn't look so digital and crunchy and so over sharpened. And first of all, let's talk about why this happens. Now, the reason why your footage a lot of times looks super sharp and over crunchy and just really digitized in terms of the sharpness is twofold. Number one is because most cameras, if not all cameras, do not shoot native RAW. Now, if they are shooting RAW, meaning they're shooting without any compression, without any filters, or without any processing on the footage, what happens is it gets processed after the fact. So when a camera like the A7 Mark III captures an image, it's a raw signal. That raw signal needs to be compressed and changed into a format that your computer can understand, or your laptop can understand, or that it can be saved onto the SD cards. So what your camera does is it looks through all the footage, and then it kind of takes out all the irrelevant information and saves as much of the best qualities of your clip, the raw clip, and turns it into a format that works for the camera in terms of saving it on the media that's in the camera. For instance, it'll take a landscape clip, take out all of the unnecessary data, and then crunch it down into a smaller file, like an MP4 or a .movie type of a file type, save it onto your SD card or your CFast card, and then you're able to play it back on your computer or in your camera. The problem with that is that when it's compressing it down and saving it into a new file type from that raw data, it's now adding things like denoising, it's adding sharpness, it's adding all these sort of things that the manufacturer thinks will make the image look better for you. Herein lies the problem. Once you start taking data and information out of the raw signal, then you're left with some heavy compression, some really heavy, crunchy, over sharpened footage. And even if you turn down the sharpness on your footage, it still isn't exactly the way it needs to be in terms of how it was acquired. And then this makes the footage look less cinematic than it really should look. So one of the ways that you can get through that is by using filters. What filters are pieces of glass that have been manipulated in different ways that you put on top of your lens or in front of your lens to give a more cinematic or a different type of feel, aesthetic feel for your footage. So for instance, if we look at the Black Pro Mist filter that I have here, I have one on my 50mm on the A7 Mark III, and what it does is it actually softens up my skin quite a bit and the texture of my skin a bit, and then it still keeps the details in my eyes and the lines that make up my face and my hair and the textures on my shirt. It still keeps all of those details, but it just refines or slightly softens and gives a little bit more of a cinematic feel and texture and aesthetic to my footage. And this is how I have this sort of cinematic look. The other filter I have is a black Satin 3 filter, which provides a similar type of aesthetic as the Black Pro Mist filter, but it's slightly different. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you 4 different filters and how they change the way the footage looks, and it's going to be subtle. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to turn on the streaming of 2K or 4K in order to really see the differences in the footage. I'll put them side by side, but I really want you to see how each filter affects the way my skin looks, the way the lighting looks, the way the overall aesthetic of the footage looks. It's really important to understand these things when you are trying to become a better digital storyteller, because then you'll understand how filters can work and which situations will probably be the best fit for the types of filters that I'm using today. So let's jump into analyzing some of the filters I have. As you can see, the main purpose of all of these filters is to relax the sharpness on the image. It's all about giving that satiny kind of velvety feel to your footage, so that when you're adding in things like film grain or you're grading the footage, it'll have a harmonious effect with the slight softening of these filters. Again, these filters are not for everybody, but I've found them to be really nice in terms of creating the type of aesthetic vibe or look that I want in my footage and in the videos that I create and the films that I create. Now that I showed you some things in the studio, I'm gonna show you some of my real world projects and how those look. Check this out. Looking at some of the footage that I did in my studio, as well as some footage that I created or captured on an actual live project, what do you think? What are your thoughts about it? Because for me, I really see the vast difference between me using no filters versus filters. And the biggest area that I see the difference is the gradation of the brightest points to the darkest points, meaning the highlights, how the highlights transition to the shadows. And a lot of times you may not see this right away, but as you continuously look at the footage, you'll see that the blacks are a little bit softer. They're not as crushed and not as harsh. And the highlights or the whitest parts of your image are not as bleached out or not as shiny or not as crispy. I think if you're trying to go for that cinematic look, one of the characteristics of film is the fact that it's not necessarily contrasty. It can transition from light to dark in a very even and consistent way. The other thing that I like about these filters, like the Glamour Glass or the Pro Black Mist filter, is that it does help to reduce the amount of blemishes that come through onto the sensor. So if your talent has a lot of blemishes or maybe has a big pimple or some bumps on their forehead, this really tones those details down a bit, and it helps to really accentuate the nice parts or the softening of the skin. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Now, many of you may be asking the question, do these filters reduce the sharpness to the point where it's noticeable, to the point where it looks like almost my footage is not in focus, or it's like it looks cheesy or it looks kind of corny? And I can categorically say that it does not. It will not make your footage look cheesy. It will not make it look like it's like that sort of dream sequence effect. If anything, these filters are really subtle and barely noticeable. Now, again, it all depends on your eye and you training your eye and seeing more and more footage. But for a person like myself, I can tell the difference between having no filter versus having the Black Pro Mist filter or the Satin, the Black Satin filter, or even the Glimmer Glass. The main thing that I want to stress is that it's all about understanding the limitations of what your camera can produce for you, especially older cameras. Most older cameras were not designed for that sort of cinema look, especially if they were DSLR or mirrorless cameras. So having some of this glass and having some of these filters as tools and using them as tools in terms of your cinematography work, your digital storytelling work, will really help expedite the process of giving you the type of cinematic look that you're looking for as a creative. Well, that's the end of another episode of Cinecut with your host, me, Tristan Barrocks. I hope you learned something and you had fun too. If you have more questions, please leave them down below in the comments section. And if you aren't a subscriber, please subscribe to the channel. If you like the video, please like and share, give it a thumbs up, and share it with your friends. Thank you so much. Stay creative and stay safe. Peace.